Hello and welcome to the last AADA Cyber Smart Dealers webinar. My name is Shani Party and I'm the Operations Manager at the AADA. I'm thrilled to introduce our presenters for today. We've got Maya and Stephen from Pitcher Partners, who will be presenting the alarming rise of dealership fraud and how to combat it. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A or chat function, and I'll pass your questions on to our presenters and get them to answer it for you. We'll be doing a polling question, which should pop up on your screen, but if you can't see it, you will also find it in the Q&A section. I need to remind you that this session is being recorded and it will be published on our website and YouTube channels, and also emailed to all the people who have registered just in case they can't make it with us today. I'd now like to pass you on to Maya and Stephen to start our webinar.
So good morning, I'm Maya and that's Steve. We're from Pitcher Partners. So we spend all our days trying to solve dealer problems, or we'd like to turn challenges into opportunities. And one of them, unfortunately, has been the rise of dealership fraud. So when we talk about dealership fraud, we're talking about inside and outside of the organization. So inside is your occupational fraud. That's what's, that's caused by your employees, unfortunately. And then the outside external fraud is referring to a lot that's gotten a lot of press, which is your cybercrime, right? That's your data breaches, your ransomware. The other two common issues that have been, rising at an alarming rate is synthetic IDs and redirecting of payments. So that's your external fraud and occupational fraud. So we'll be talking about both today. The stories that we've heard, Steve, how many clients of yours, how many dealers of yours the last 12 months have come to you about some fraud incident that's happened?
Yeah, it's been about 25% of my client base, unfortunately, has had some sort of small, large, or in the middle type frauds recently. And mostly those occupational frauds internal to the business. We have seen an uptick in cyber frauds, but that's been covered quite extensively, but we'll go through a few of those as well.
Yeah. So we're going to first start with a poll. So I'd like to find out from the attendees what they think the average real life fraud incident costs a business. There's a lot of studies that are done across the globe, across all industries, and they actually have a number. So on the screen, you see what is the average cost a business loses to fraud, and this is a real life number. So A is either 15% of gross profit, B, 5% of gross profit, C, 2% of net profit, and D, 5% of revenue. So if you could go ahead, I think in Teams, right, Shani, there's some way you can submit what you think what businesses are getting, losing to fraud every year. And we'll see the results come up, right? To everyone, so you can share the results. Great. So I'll give you about a minute to submit.
Mark thinks it's B. Got one. Don't be afraid. Click on a number, or submit a letter. There's another B. A. Couple A's coming through. It seems we have a divide between male and female. All the males think it's B. Oh, there's an A from a male. Brett thinks it's A, but most of the females think it's A. Okay.
So what's the, is there like a summary, Shani, that comes up?
It's like an A or B.
Oh, is it in the chat? Maybe we see it in the chat here. Hang on.
Yeah. A's and B's, looks like.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
percentages don't seem to be adding up on
here.
here.
That's all right. Yeah, it's just give us an indication what people think. So.
Oh, we got a D. We got a D. What do we think it is?
Well, it's actually D. So
D is correct.
Yep. So the average business loses 5% of revenue. So if you think about a dealership, that's probably not really, because this is across all industries across the globe, right? These studies that are done on fraudulent incidents. So let's be conservative. A lot of people thought it was 15, 5% of gross profit. So if you work out what that number would be, $200 million business, you're supposed to make what, 15% gross profit? So that would be 30 million?
300 million. Oh, sorry,
30 million would be your gross profit. You take 5% of that, that's $1.5 million, one Ford incident. So, and that's right off your bottom line, right? So that's really what's really happening right now. And then think about how many cars you got to sell to make that, right? Even if you go even less than that, say your gross profit's 15 million, 5% of that, still 750,000. So it's, the incidents that we're going to go through locally as well as globally at dealers, the dollars we're seeing is much larger than it used to be in the past. So that's one of the things we were talking about is why today it's never been more dangerous for dealerships when it comes to fraud. It's never been this dangerous. And we're going to go through that. And one of those things is because the dollars we're talking about is much larger. Okay, so yeah, we're going to go through the incidents in Australia and globally. It's really the US, specifically the dealerships, internal and external case studies. Then we're going to break some case studies down because you always, to be able to prevent fraud, you have to see what went wrong in the first place. So that's how controls are built. It's because somebody stole money that way, right? And then we'll touch on some of the factors why we think today's never been more dangerous for fraud in dealerships. And then, like every dealer, I come with a problem. They want to know how to fix it. So we've come up with some solutions, and we're also very aware that, you know, the biggest complaint I've heard from dealers about fraud and preventing it is, you know, why don't I've been making a lot of money. I'm going to roll the dice. Why spend money on something that may or may not happen, right? But I think those days are gone because in their head, it's thousands of dollars, but now it's tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So even though you've got pressure to reduce expenses, you still have to put things in place to prevent fraud, at least detect it. And the new weapon we do have today is technology. So we're going to go through how you can use technology to prevent and detect fraud. So it's a much cheaper solution than having an internal audit department or a whole IT department, 24/7 all year long. So Steve, I don't know if you have anything to add. No. Okay. So we're going to go into. I know you guys probably have heard this stuff before, but we're just going to do some refreshers as to what external fraud, the types of external fraud, that's the common challenges, which is your ransomware, your synthetic IDs, and redirecting of payments. So we're just going to revisit the definition of that so we understand and how it comes about. So I'll let Steve get into ransomware.
So there's been a significant uptick, in particular around the brands, finance companies, and unfortunately lawyers and accountants getting hacked in ransomware sort of installed via malware on our systems. So globally, that's projected to be a very significant cost of around $265 billion by 2031. But that's usually these are the things where your employees unfortunately click on the wrong thing, download some sort of file, an executable. I'm not an IT guy. But I literally do not click on anything that I don't think is from someone I trust or that I know, on the basis that you never know, right? We recently, to put in perspective, not one of my clients, but one of our clients had their emails hacked, and they've intercepted, obviously, emails coming from us, and they replicated the email address of one of our PAs who sends out invoices and said, "Oh, we've changed our bank accounts. Please pay this new bank account." Now that's a very simple fraud to commit, and pretty much anyone could do that. But the client fell for it. So unfortunately, they paid what they thought was our fee into someone else's bank account, and that's not ransomware, but that's just how easy these sort of things can happen. And with just a bit of awareness, this is where you can just, with training and awareness of your staff, these sort of things can be really easily prevented. And ransomware, if you don't have a good email system that blocks any sort of dangerous messages, because now there's a lot of software you can use to prevent these emails from coming through. But if you don't have it, you're wide open to this. And if you have a Gmail account, you'll see all the stuff that comes to you. Just don't click on any of it. Go to the next slide here. So synthetic ID fraud, we covered this last time in the last presentation we did a few months back. But this is where someone can very easily replicate a person, a real person, and it's super simple to do. Everyone shared all their personal information on Facebook and Instagram and other social media outlets, and they've shared most of their professional identification through LinkedIn. So it doesn't take much to do a quick search on a person and use some AI. There's some really good AI technology out there now that can create identity IDs basically, and putting your picture on someone else's bio ID. So there's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of companies that spun up to sort of prevent this. A good example is in New South Wales. We've got digital IDs. There's a lot of checks and balances between that. There's a lot of companies out there trying to do this from an ID check point of view. AutoSettle, who I'm an advisory board member of, do a lot of this stuff to verify you're dealing with the right person. But this is happening in a big way in the U.S. It's happening in Australia. There's quite a number of cases in Australia where this has happened, and in particular down in Victoria at a Benz dealership. But I mean, I think the latest, it might be on the next slide. I'm not sure. The latest number in the U.S. Oh no, this isn't it. My apologies. The Visa did a study. Visa, as in the credit card company, did a study. There's $2 billion worth of vehicle loans in America that were obtained fraudulently using synthetic IDs. So basically, I'm now Maya Sutanto. I create an ID. I go and buy a car, get a loan, and basically I never make a payment. Happens a lot. And the latest thing I've basically in talking to my clients. Subscription is now the new thing where people are basically fraudulently stealing cars. They will use synthetic ID to get a subscription. They'll take delivery of the vehicle, or they'll obviously just you'll go and just jump in the car and then just drive off with the car and never make a payment and never return the car. So in the client I visited this week, they said one a week minimum, almost one a day. They're losing cars, and they have to get the police out there trying to recover these vehicles. So synthetic ID is a huge issue in the U.S. at the moment, and most banks will sort of eat that loss. But now in the States, we're seeing that responsibility now shifting to the dealer to verify that they're actually dealing with the person that they say they are.
Yeah, so they're actually writing that term now in the US into floor plan agreements. And, Australia is probably not that far behind, right? The finance companies. So the term is not that it's happened. It's making sure the dealership has processes in place that, that the finance provider expects you to have. So it would be that AutoSettle. We go through some tools, Experian and other companies have certain processes. In the US, like there's what they call a red flag checklist that a customer has to go through, and it is insane how detailed it is. And when a customer comes in, they have to go through this it's on their F&I system. So we'll go through some of those tools a little later. But so yes, these are some of the stats, and both on internal and external fraud. So we'll just finish off external fraud. You guys all know about. I know the AADA said that they consider this synthetic ID is probably one of the largest threats to the industry today, and they've done a lot of work around that. So the Nissan case and AP Eagers, I know you guys are familiar with that. One you may not be familiar with that I think is even a bigger threat for dealers is what happened to CDK. So CDK is a DMS in the States, probably accounts for half of the dealers in the US. So that's 15,000 dealerships. And then Reynolds, which is where Pentana came from, would be the other 45%. So that's how the DMS industry, it's the same right over there, right? They dominate the big ones. But CDK got hacked in June. And it was a big deal. Every dealership had to go to pen and paper for a few days. So you can imagine. So they've estimated the damage at $1 billion for the dealers. And that there were 5% less new cars were sold because of it in the States. So you can just think about what that number is. So $1 billion, that's based on what you would expect, right? Your lost vehicle sales, your lost parts and service earnings, because you've had to go manual, right? Pen and paper, driving deals to what they call the DMV, which is the registration. They're spending time doing these manual processes when they normally would have been automated, and it'd be selling more cars and more parts and more service, right? So there's that. But also, if you think about it, you're losing vehicle sales, so now they have more cars in stock and paying more floor plan interest. So there was that cost. And then also all the third-party vendors and service. You know how many third-party vendors there are? A lot that attach on to the DMS, right? So they all now have to have an audit, right? And look at their system. So it's the additional costs. And then obviously there's reputational damage and litigation. So $1 billion, it's probably more than that actually. So, but we're going to break that case down in a few a little later, because I think it's really important, because that could happen here. That could happen to all the other DMSs that are here, you know, because CDK, just like all these other DMSs, have very similar issues in a lot of ways. So we'll go through a bit of that in detail. Synthetic IDs, there's that 2 billion in the US, but that's a huge number. I just still can't get my mind around that. But in Australia, I think it was about 80,000 vehicles in 23 were a victim to synthetic IDs, but that includes private.
Yeah, so a lot of those were Facebook private to private sales. So and that's a lot of the, you know, sort of people turning up and stealing your car when they come to test drive it. So yeah, definitely be careful what you're doing out there on Facebook or other platforms.
Yeah, and then there was a specific case recently in Sydney where synthetic IDs were made and car loans applied for luxury cars, and they got away with $10 million for cars that didn't exist. They didn't really name any finance companies in Sydney, but I know TFS was one of them. So yeah, so it's happening here, and it's happening a big way. And then the other common external fraud type is the redirecting of customer payments, which Steve touched on, but 16 million was stolen in 23 through that method. So these are big numbers in the external fraud side, but our internal fraud, occupational fraud is also rising. And you'll see on the left-hand side of the slide there, these are the stories that we've been hearing from dealers in the last year or so, like last 11, 12 months. I can't believe it's December already. And if you read some of them, buying trades personally, manipulating ROs, manipulating tech hours to achieve bonuses, stealing parts. I mean, these are things that this is old news, right? This stuff happened in the past. The difference now is back then, pre-pandemic, you were talking about thousands of dollars of this type of, these type of frauds. None of them were less than $10,000. There were tens of thousands to over 200,000 plus, every single one of these. So the dollars have definitely changed, and we're going to go through why that's happening in a little bit. But I mean, I bet you're all reading some of those things, and I know those have happened at your dealerships, right? But yeah, I don't know if you wanted to add to some of those stories.
No,
yeah.
Look, we're going to go through some specific case studies here, and these are things that have been happening since dealerships have been in existence. But I think we've taken our eye off the ball, in particular since 2020, because our profits have been good, and a lot of these things have been happening under our nose, and we haven't really realized it. But we'll talk about that now.
Yeah, I will say one thing though: every single one of these stories is because of segregation of duties. So that's when people have too much access, right? Because they're doing conflicting duties, and it's not just about accounting anymore, right? It's operational stuff. Because the service manager was able to do that, obviously, because they had access to adjusting ROs at point of sale. That's how they did that. Service advisors, I mean, manually entering hours, that's probably more rare than common, because usually using automated systems now. But that's to do with, I mean, it's probably still happening because they can enter the text hours, or, in the back end, everyone's usually they're relying on parts and service managers to get that stuff right. But if you notice, a service manager was committing fraud. So that's the other new thing, right? It's coming from management. So, we talked about this. So hopefully we've scared you enough, even though you probably didn't need convincing. So yeah, I'm going to break down the CDK ransomware attack. So this is what happened. So it was first reported in June. They took the systems offline. They thought they fixed it, restored it, and then they got hit again by the cyber crime gang. They were called Black Suit. And these gangs are very sophisticated, right? They play the long game, right? And they know how to get through whatever gaps there are. And that's how they went after customer information. And in the US, and we have it here, maybe not as stringent as over in the US, but they've got this information called PII, which is personal identification you can go to jail for letting this stuff out, right? At dealerships. So things like social security numbers, that would be like tax file numbers, bank account details, credit card information, addresses, telephone numbers. They're very strict in the US about privacy of this sort of information. They're going to get sued a lot is what's going to happen if this information gets out. So that's obviously what they went after. And so what did we learn from that? Well, the biggest thing, the root cause was that CDK's system was outdated legacy system. So what that means is, I'm no techie, but basically it hadn't been upgraded, because of this race to make technology user-friendly. And this is CDK, this is Pentana, this is all the DMSs that are out there that have been around a long time. They just keep making it easy to use and more, there's AI, and by doing that, they're just doing quick fixes, and it's like, filling a pothole, right? And so these hackers, they know that. And so they find that it causes vulnerabilities and gaps in the security. And that's the reason that they got in. Now, hackers also go after people like CDK or a DMS provider, because look at the amount of people they can impact, right? And how much information they can get. Because it's all about the information and how valuable it is. And there's a lot of invaluable information in a DMS. It's not just one business, right? In case of CDK, it was 15,000 dealerships, half the industry, with one hack. My understanding is the rant, they asked for 10 million, they raised it to 50 million. And it's rumored, obviously, CDK hasn't come out and made any comments or provided details, but they did pay in cryptocurrency, but something roughly it's $25 million. There's firms out there that track that sort of thing. So that's what is rumored for them to have paid. The other things you got to look at is if you're going to have a DMS that's a third-party provider, I mean, you're relying on it for payroll, for finance, everything in your dealership. So your first question should be, hello, DMS provider, what are you doing about this? What are you doing about cybercrime and ransomware, right? So this is a lesson that I think dealers here should learn about, with whoever their DMS is, to make sure that they've got these things in place. So that's that third-party risk management. And then there's also you yourself, right? And that's the security protocols. I'm sure some of you have auditors that go on about user access. There's a reason for that, right? That's the strong access controls. Is you've got to understand who can get into your system and what functions they can use. That stuff is very, very important, because this is not about if this is going to happen, this is about when it'll happen. So you just have to be ready as the dealer and also understand what your DMS provider is doing. If this happens, do they have a recovery plan? Where are they backing their data up? Is there, the response plan, should be things like, should include things like how to maintain the problem. Like they should have a plan as if it's going to happen tomorrow. So how do they maintain it? How will they communicate to you as the dealer and your customers? Other things they would do is, what's the recovery process, right? And all your data should be somewhere where the hacker can't get to. So that type of stuff. And then honestly, every DMS provider should have a cybersecurity expert for this very reason, to know how to plan for this sort of situation, and then also how to protect against breaches and leaks and unauthorized access. There's a lot of technical stuff that, you have to understand. So,
and I think to touch on the leaks there, I think the important bit is obviously there's a communication plan after something like this happens. And the important bit there is to understand, to keep your own ship tight, so that you don't have people leaking, all the dirty laundry. Obviously you're trying to fix the issue. You're trying to communicate to your stakeholders. Make sure you don't have people out there giving, all the blow by blow of what's actually happening, because you want to control that message, obviously in a very open way. But you don't want them to know that, hey, we're now negotiating with these hackers to pay a ransom. Like these sort of things should not be released. We can go to the next one.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll just point out, I know I'm not a techie either, and I'm sure there's plenty of people on the call that isn't either. So zero trust encryption and zero knowledge encryption, I mean, this is the stuff your cybersecurity person would know. But my understanding, it's where you assume that every computer that can access your DMS and every user can be compromised. You just believe that. So if you accept that, then there should be some processes in place to always test validity and whatnot. So that's in case anybody was wondering what that meant. Yeah, okay.
Talk about this one, if
Yeah.
you like. This is just touching back on that big issue of the old clunky software, and for the accountants on the call, I always equate this back to we've got all these systems that back up how we run our dealership, how we do our accounting, but then we always default back to Excel. You know, the entire business is run on Excel, despite the fact that we have that we pay a lot of money in subscription fees to our providers of all our software solutions. And this is what's called the technical debt. It's I think it was estimated, and I pulled this from the Wall Street Journal probably back in April, $1.52 trillion. It's a big problem, but you know, you have to think about the fact that most of these accounting systems and software systems were all written in the 80s when computers were very at the very beginning of going digital. And then as we evolved in the 90s, 2000, 2010s, 2020, we just kept doing band-aid solutions rather than actually fixing or rebuilding the system. And that is a really good quote from Wall Street Journal. Banking systems are now loaded with COBOL. If anyone knows what COBOL is, there's a few people in there probably do that's on this call. But it was built so long ago, the guy who built it is either dead or doesn't work for the business anymore. So no one actually even understands how the system could be rewritten because they weren't the ones who were the initial architects. So for a lot, and the reason that's why they're not rebuilding these systems or fixing this technical debt is because they actually can't rebuild it without starting from zero. So look, it's an issue that can't be solved easily or cheaply, but importantly, just be aware of it so that you know that you've got a lot of access points and vulnerabilities amongst all the software systems you have in use at your dealership. All right, to the fun part.
Yeah. It
Case
has
study.
not been fun so far, has it? Okay, so we mentioned some of the Australian incidents that have happened, and so I've got some other ones that I always like to break ground because of how much was wrong. So this is Sandy. Yep, she's a controller, right? And she in a dealership group and obviously had access to everything, right? And she stole $10 million over a period of 6 years. And the dealer group was financially audited. So how she did it was she would transfer 25,000 every week. There's obviously a big dealership group, so that wasn't a lot of money. From the operating account to the payroll account, and she'd obviously pay herself. Then she wiped out the transactions with journal entries, and then she manipulated bank statements, and then she handed them over to the auditors. So that's how she got rid of all the fraudulent transfers. She also used, because obviously money was disappearing, so she would put cars sold back into inventory. So she manipulated floor plan statements, gave those to the auditors. So, and it took the CFO 6 years before he started seeing things that were weird. 6 years, $10 million, right? So when he asked questions, that's when she confessed. And so that's always the story for most stories where fraud was caught was not because it was caught. It was because someone started asking questions or by pure luck. They're the common reasons why we, pick up on most fraud. So, and they recovered 1.2 million out of the 10 million. That's the other part of this that always happens. You never, ever recover the money that was stolen. Never. It's very rare. I mean, I should never say never, but it would be very rare because the police actually won't do a lot unless you hand it to them on a silver platter. And I have another case study where that did happen. But I mean, if we can think about what went wrong here, which is everything, by the way. So the lessons we would learn, right, is the first thing is red flag behavior. So red flag behavior is things like there's something going on in their personal lives, their lifestyle changed, like divorce, gambling, because that never happens in a dealership. Things like they're very defensive over their duties. They never take holidays, that type of stuff. So that's what we call red flag behavior.
Or they're living out there.
Yep, living beyond their means, which is what happened here in a big way. So Sandy would get private jets, bought her family members' houses. She went to Rome and had a private audience with the Pope, was on some cooking show with Kevin Spacey. So her lifestyle did change. And her accounting department, there's no way that they didn't know what was happening. So if you think about that, there's actually some very low cost methods of how you would pick that up. You may not prevent this from happening, but if they had a hotline in place, where, because people don't usually like to snitch on the people they work with, but if it's anonymous, you know what I mean? And you've got to make it easy for them to alert owners or executive management to what's happening in the dealership. So that's a really cheap way of doing that. Or when you have, always have exit interviews, because when people are leaving, they care a lot less than snitching on other people. And that's how you find out what's happening in the dealership. So those are two very low cost ways that would have probably picked up on this pretty quickly. And then it wouldn't have been $10 million. It would have been tens of thousands instead of $10 million. So a lot of the solutions that we have or suggest, very hard to prevent fraud in the first place, but what you want to be is you want to detect it as quick as possible. And that's how you reduce the damage. And that's how, you're never going to recover it. So just make sure it doesn't happen in the first place, like to a point where it's just an unacceptable amount to lose, right? So other suggestions that went wrong here is, segregation of duties. I can't go on about that enough, but the reality is, your controller, your office manager, these people are always going to be doing conflicting things, aren't they? Conflicting duties. They're going to have access to everything. That is not going to go away. So knowing that and then understanding what to do to fix that. And I have some very low tech ways using technology of how you can monitor those people that have access to sensitive DMS functions. So we'll go through that a little later. But using that same premise though, like skepticism, like the CFO, it took him or her 6 years to ask questions. Like it should be every month end, right? It's looking at your main reconciliations. That's your floor plan, your inventory, and your bank, right? And then just running the bank statements yourself, right? Running it off the website. You don't have to do it every time, maybe every second month. Ask a question here and there. Prevention, if Sandy knew that someone was looking at this stuff, it might have been enough to stop her, before she got to, $1 million, right? So that skepticism is going to be built into your culture. That costs you no money at all, right? And then, doing the reconciliations, making sure they're part of your month-end package that goes to owners. Now, I know owners are busy, right? But as long as they're getting them and the organization knows that they're getting them, that could be all it takes to stop someone from stealing from you. So, and then just randomly asking a question now and again. You don't need to absorb everything you're given. They just need to know that you're getting it, right? So that's my biggest recommendation is it's all about the show of what you're getting, like the reports you're getting. It's the most powerful tool you've got. So, okay. So the next case study, Brittany, she was an office manager. She took off with $250,000 via refund checks of warranty. So it's a lot of checks, isn't it? And again, it was the red flag behavior. She was possessive of her work. Also, she could do everything. There's a segregation of duties problem. And so what she was doing, she was sending checks to her mother. So the actual check had her mother's name on there, so same last name. And she was forging the signatures. There's not much you can do about that one, but she was changing the posting detail. So at month end, she was assigning other customer numbers. So on the detail, it wasn't her mother, it was somebody else. So again, it's that segregation of duties. Again, she's going to be paying back $500 per month for 42 years. So needless to say that they're not getting that money back. So some of the things, as we don't, in the old days, you used to get the original checks, right, sent back to you, and that doesn't happen anymore. But as part of that skepticism, methods of oversight, the controller should be looking at checks online, right? Because you'll get the real image. They would have picked it up straight away. Not all the time, just randomly. At the segregation of duties we talked about, and then red flag behavior, right? We've already talked about it. So you see how it's the same things that are happening. The dollars are huge though, right? This is not rocket science. So I think, the last couple of years, dealers have forgotten about this sort of thing. So it's time our purpose today is to go, guys, we've got to dust off our processes and controls and start putting some of these things in place, which don't cost a lot of money. And in a little while, we'll talk about how we can use technology that we didn't have before, right? So Marvin, so it's not just accounting, it's operational. So he was a counter person. He took off with 200,000 of parts. He backed up his truck after hours and sold parts online. And how he was hiding it was adjusting the quantity on hand in the pad, right? Parts per the parts system, not the general ledgers. So really obvious things wrong here, right? One, Marvin shouldn't have been allowed to be in the parts department after hours. Nobody should, right? That's number one. Number two, video surveillance, like security. There should be cameras up in the parts department. So that would have already stopped it. Also, with the quantity on hand, right? I deal with a lot of big dealer groups, and they always say, I said, oh, the function to adjust quantity to hand should be with no one except the parts manager. You shouldn't be doing that so much that somebody else besides the parts manager needs access to that. Price, that's part of business, right? So most people in parts will need that function, but quantity on hand, no. And I always say, oh, you got to not have, and they always say, no, only the parts manager has access. And I'll tell you, every single time, there's always other people that have access to that function, and they're shocked, right? So user access, we'll go through that in some of our solutions. You can get that data out of your DMS and summarized by a lot of these. There's also a report in parts. It's called the counterperson override report. So what that does is it shows every single change that's happened to the pad. So it says quantity on hand changes, price changes, payment method changes, and it does it by person. So using technology, you can summarize that information every quarter, every month, and it would have picked up Marvin doing, crazy stuff. So.
Yeah, with this one, I think in your accounts department or in your F&I department, you wouldn't allow just anyone to do a credit card refund on your terminal, right? So this is the same thing. You wouldn't allow just anyone because it's the same. It's still money. Parts are money. Money's money, right? So you wouldn't just allow anyone just to have a refund or to change the accounting system to misappropriate these parts. So I think that those sort of controls need to be stuck in every department so that you have to start thinking of your inventory as cash, which is exactly what it is.
Yeah, so in this case, they did recover everything, but that's because when they found out what Marvin was doing, they didn't pick him up straight away. They hired an investigator, got photos, followed him home, and they pretty much had all the evidence and then handed it over to the police, and then the police did something. So that, I always get asked about, oh, what should you do? One of the metrics around fraud is that, oh, it's always because we don't prosecute, right? And just go to another dealership and do the same thing. But on the other side of the coin, though, it's like, well, it's expensive and you don't recover the money anyway. So what's the point? So I hear that a lot. So my response to it all is, hey, you know what? Let's just not have it happen in the first place. Right. So, or at least to, minimize the damage. So it's a point where you're like, okay, I'll just, fire this person and, and the damage is to a point that you could tolerate is my best real life response. But also there's also the factor of showing everybody else in the dealership what happens when you get caught. There's that too. So there's a lot of arguments to prosecute or not to prosecute. I think there's no cookie cutter approach. I think you have to look at each specific situation and the organization itself. So, okay. So I think that was some of the real life case studies. I don't know if Shani, if anyone has questions about any of those case studies. Sometimes people want to ask certain things that I hadn't thought of.
We don't have anything in the chat or the Q&A at the moment, but I will let you know if anything pops up.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah. So, why does fraud happen? Obviously, those case studies demonstrate some of that. Things we didn't touch on though is, dealerships have always been a target for fraud, and it's because high dollar cash transactions are happening, right? And then it's a small business. So compared to some of the big, huge conglomerates, right? I know things have changed quite a bit recently, but still relatively, they're private businesses, right? And so you tend to have that lack of segregation of duties. I mean, look at the accounting department, right? We keep it small because they don't generate revenue. So hence why people do conflicting duty, and you've got that segregation of, people have access to multiple sensitive DMS functions. So that's always been the case. What is different now is this. So some of you may be familiar with what we call the fraud triangle. So what it means, it's saying is, if you have these three elements in play, so pressure to commit fraud, there's an opportunity to commit fraud, and then rationalizing it later, it encourages somebody to commit fraud. So if you look at today's dealership world, right? Pressure is the reduced income, people that were making big money now aren't. The opportunity is that dealers have been making money, so they've become a little rusty with, and not as diligent with their controls and oversight. And then the rationalization is how many dealerships have been bought and sold in the last 5 to 10 years, right? A lot. So now dealership personnel have owners they don't have a relationship with. It's much more common. The other difference is that ownership and management used to be the same. That was common. Now that is not, now that's probably the exception, right? So ownership is no longer physically at these dealerships. So you have all three of those things, right? That also combined with the fact that, I'll just get to this next slide here, that all the fraud incidents that have been studied the last couple of years, there's multiple perpetrators, so you've got collusion. So it's almost impossible to prevent. And they're coming from management. So those stories that we've heard in Australia, like Australian dealers, it was a service manager. The first one about the trades was a DP that had 5% ownership. So all of those things combined is creating a very dangerous time for fraud in a dealership. And then that's why the dollars are so large for a weakness that in the past would have been thousands of dollars, not $100,000. So that's why I feel like, there's never been a greater need to get your processes and, your oversight and your monitoring of fraud in place and working properly. And we're going to help you with some, and I know you got to spend money to do that in a time when you're supposed to reduce expenses, right? So it is a little frustrating. So we've had to think of ways where we can compromise, right? Still put things that are effective in place, but doesn't cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars, like having a full-time, internal audit department. Because I know a lot of dealer groups can't afford to have that, right? So we'll go through that in a bit. And so here are some of those red flag behaviors. So every fraud, 85% of frauds that happen have at least one of those in that's happening, which is usually the living beyond one's means. I mean, gambling problems, right? These are very common. So again, we came up with some low cost ways there, right? So that's the hotline, that's the exit interviews. And so that doesn't cost a lot of money to put in place. And then we talked about some of this. There's some other, stats around the fact that, it's most of the time it's men and between the age of 30 and 50. But obviously we saw Sandy and Brittany, right? So when it's a female, it's like go big or go home. So, the reason why we always look at some of this stuff is so you can understand, so you can pick up on what's happening in your dealership, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing I forgot to mention are the concealment methods. So now manipulating physical documents is becoming much higher and in a digital world. So that's Sandy, right? Manipulating the bank statements and the floor plan statements. So all of that is, creating this very dangerous time for dealerships when it comes to fraud. Okay. So what everybody's been waiting for, I'm sure. How do we fix it? How do we fix it, Maya? So some of them, right? It's the, external audits, management review. So when we say management review, we're talking about it's got to be more effective, right? Not just going through the motions, which I think happens a lot. And what we're suggesting is you combine that with data, what we call data monitoring or data mining. A lot of big conglomerates are doing it. They've been doing it for years now, right? There's softwares out there that do that sort of thing, but something that's specific for dealerships, we don't know of one, but your DMS, right, it measures everything, as you know. Like if you know how to get information out of your DMS, then using tools like Power Query in Excel or Power BI, and you know what to look for, you can summarize and make useful reports for management to then go do something with it. And the thing about data mining is that's different from the traditional monitoring methods of having, say, internal audit. Is that with internal, they pick a haphazard sample. They don't pick everything. So say you want to look at, all your checks and EFTs, your cash disbursements. They'll pick a sample of those. With data mining, you can download all your cash disbursements for a year. And using knowledge of knowing what to look for and knowing how to get it out of your DMS, and then using things like Power BI to summarize it. So I'll give you we've got some examples in a minute. You can find things, you look for patterns, because usually if a fraud is happening where it's like multiple perpetrators or management, this is going to be the only way you're going to find it, right? And then once you've got a targeted area and it comes up with exceptions, then you send in your pit bulls, right, to look at source documentation and whatnot. That doesn't go away. So that's what data mining is. But you have to, it's important, you've got to do something with the results. And we'll go through like what patterns to look for in a dealership. Surprise audits, obviously, mandatory vacation. I know a lot of you, this is not new stuff. And then the hotline I talked about. So what this table is doing, it just shows that, you know, if you have the control in place, it halves the time, and obviously the money that gets taken is a lot less. So that's the objective here is to say you got to detect it really quickly. Data mining is what's that's going to help you detect it quickly. Okay. So and also it's the coverage. You look at everything and you can look at it all the time. Like once you set it up, you can press a button every month, every quarter, and there's no way you're not going to pick it up not using, you know, if you use data mining. Okay, so segregation of duties is the cause of every single fraud that's ever happened in a dealership ever, right? And that's not going to go away. Your controller, your office manager is going to have access to journals, general journals, to writing checks. That's not going away either. So we got to be smarter about how we got to monitor them. So anyone that has a sensitive DMS function, look at what they're doing. So download, so I'll give you an example. Here's an example here with data analytics. If it was a controller, you download all the general journals. I think I have it over here actually. Yeah. So I've given you some like what patterns to look for, right? So if it's general journals, you can download all your general journals. You can summarize by user, right? Like your controller. You can see if they're posting them outside of hours. You can look for journals. You know, I know this doesn't happen, but general journals shouldn't be used to record cash disbursements or cash receipts. They should be used to correct things, right? So if you know what you're looking for, you can summarize by that. And then it'll, if like Sandy, for example, there is no way you wouldn't have picked that up in a week, right? You just had to download the journals and go, oh, why is she using general journals to put cars back in inventory? We all know that's not how we record a car, right? Or reducing floor plan. That would have, you know, the accounts that the debits and credits are going to, it would have been picked up immediately. So that's just an example of that.
I think there the important thing is to don't look at the result or the balance sheet or the management account. It's look at the look at the source documentation, because that'll always tell a different story. And you don't need to do it every time, like you said. It's once a quarter, once every or a couple twice a year, whatever it is. But you'll start picking up those trends. Sorry.
Yeah. So cash disbursements, one of the things I look for is I download the cash disbursements. As you all know, that in the general ledger doesn't give you a lot of information, right? It gives you date, amount, the payee, and who posted it. But if you download, say, your vendor file, your name file, that's a Pentana term, but basically it's all the information like address, name, and all that sort of stuff, employee listing. And so then you can, using things like Power BI, and it can summarize if there's any check or EFT that was to a payee that had an address that matched an employee address. And it would do it with a press of a button. So it gets very powerful, as you can see. New vendors. Let's download every, cash disbursement to a vendor that's new, right? Because when you have, again, when you have access to everything, Brittany or Sandy could have set up a fake vendor and issued a check, right? The vendor's in the system. So if you as CFO would see the check, the cash disbursement, the support, oh, yep, that's approved vendor, and signed it. But you wouldn't have known that it was a new vendor if you hadn't used data mining to do it. So those are just examples of how you can use data mining to zero in on patterns, to pick up on that collusion from multiple perpetrators, sophisticated frauds that are been happening recently.
I think the important bit there as well, if you're looking at vendors, that'll prevent that paying the wrong bank account for an external fraud as well.
Yeah.
Right, because there has to be a change to the master file for the vendor. And you say, why? Well, we've been paying rent to this account for the last 35 years. Why are we paying it to a new bank account? Pick up the phone, understand what's going on.
Yeah, so if you know how to get it out of your DMS, and then you know what you're looking for, and then you know how to use these tools to summarize it and give it to, executive management and owners, because that's what we're talking about here, right? Because the frauds that are happening are coming from a much higher level. And But the other thing is, once you have these results, and everybody in the organization knows the owners are getting it, whether the owner's looking at it or not, they don't know that. That's really important that you make sure that message gets out. And then you've got to do something with those results, though. Like, so if it spits out exceptions, those exceptions may be okay, but you've got to investigate. So my experience with dealer groups that I've done this type of reporting for has been, I'll give you an example. We looked at ROs. We summarized all the internal ROs for all the dealerships by by manager, by advisor, and we looked for patterns. So things like internal ROs being close to cost of sale accounts or sale accounts. And we would come up with a report, but the owner also wanted me to sit down and have a meeting with the GM and the service manager so that they would answer it. And then we would then take it from there. So that was also very important, so that then they knew, oh, wow, look at what they're looking at. So that's a very important part of the process to make data mining effective. The other thing too is to be smart, right? About look, I know resources in the accounting department are tough, right? So I would make sure, you know what I mean? Like the reconciliations, you really do have to separate between preparer and reviewer is your bank, your inventory, and your floor plan. And so you can always find someone that's not, the controller or the office manager that can do one or two of those things, right? So just be smart about how you do those reconciliations. And I always recommend put those reconciliations as part of the month-end package to owners and executive management. The month-end package should not just be management accounts. It should be reconciliations. It should be data mining reports and a balance sheet. And whether the owner's looking at all that is not the point. The point is that everyone knows what goes into that package. Yep. So that's very powerful. I can't stress that enough, right? I will touch on user access. So the user access report is probably for a dealership about 1,000 pages long, right? Because it shows how every single person has access to in the DMS using data mining. Again, being smart about it. Go after functions that are sensitive. So writing checks, posting journals, adjusting ROs at point of sale, quantity on hand adjustments. And then you could come up with 10, 15 functions. And using data mining, you can do a summary as to who has access to all of those functions. And that's how you monitor it, right? That's because you just got to figure out what functions matter to financial reporting in cash. And it's actually incredibly easy to keep on top of that. Because when I hear the story, oh, that person doesn't use it anyway, that just because policy says they don't use it doesn't mean they're not. Okay, so you got to stay on top of who has access to what. And I know with DMSs, it can get quite overwhelming, looking at this kind of data. So yeah, these are all, this is all around that whole data mining and how to use your DMS as a tool for oversight.
And this slide here with the discounting, at the moment, you should be looking at your service department and looking at the grosses, as well as particularly your parts department. Those are your backbone of your business. And in tough times when we're struggling with rising costs, you're looking for gross profit. Look who's discounting at the counter. And you can run these reports by person, and look who's giving away your money, basically, who's giving away your gross. It's not exactly fraud, but it is a profit leak.
Yeah. I mean that's when dealerships make less money because ownership is no longer on site. It's for two reasons, right? Fraud, and also because everyone's focused on commission, right? So you just got to you can use technology now to overcome that weakness, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is just more of, I just did it by department, so you can know what patterns to look for. And I think, Shani, we're going to be giving these slides to everybody on the call. So,
Yeah, excellent.
One of the things, this is a physical kind of solution. So with the synthetic IDs, hackers, they get information lots of ways, right? I think social engineering, phishing, but also from information lying around the dealership. Right. So I bought my car a few months ago, and I saw copies of driver's licenses all over the place, like in the showroom, just lying around. So one of the things you could do is like do a sweep of the showroom, F&I, and, at business managers' offices and things, and make sure there's no sensitive information of customers around. So
clean desk policy.
Yeah, clean desk policy. So if they know you're doing that, maybe they'll make a bigger effort to be more tidy and more, diligent about making sure there's no sensitive information around. So. Okay, and then so we also have some low-cost solutions around cybersecurity that I'll let Steve go through.
Yeah. So as we presented previously, there's some really easy ways to prevent cyber crime or external crime into your dealership. It's as simple as, educate your employees, make sure all of your software systems are up to date, and you've got all the correct antiviral softwares updated and installed. Limit access, as we just been discussing now, but more so around all the periphery software systems that bolt onto your DMS. You've got a DMS that runs your business, but if you ever did an inventory of all the different software systems you use within your business, the list is very long. Understand all the plugin points and access, and make sure that you limit the ones you don't need. Or if you do have them, make sure that you've actually secured that up. And obviously make backups online so that if you do get hacked, you don't have to pay the ransom if you don't choose to, and you're not crippled by someone locking up all your data. Again, some other ways to prevent and to detect, obviously practice critical communications should you have to disclose the fact that you had a hack or a breach. Change your passwords every 6 months. I know a lot of places, clients of mine, they don't change their passwords. Here at Pitcher Partners, it's every 90 days. To me, it's a lot, but and make sure your passwords are strong. Typically how that is you do sort of a phrase. So, I like to go to the beach on Thursdays, but then change, obviously, some of the letters are capitals, some of the letters are replaced with numbers, but it needs to be somewhere around 12 to 16 characters long. And the longer the better. And don't forget your physical security, cameras, locks on the doors, simple things like that. Make sure if you've got a laptop, it goes home with the individual, or it gets locked up in a locker or somewhere in a desk drawer, so that people can't just get access to your hardware. And use all the tools you have out there to do credit checks, fraud checks. Make sure you're dealing with the person you say you're dealing with. Experian, Equifax, Cox. There's lots of ways to do background checks on people, and making sure that everyone has a mindset of risk, a mindset of cybersecurity, and a mindset of fraud prevention and detection. And I know, and I think we say there, just doing a driver license scan or check in a credit check isn't sufficient. You actually need to verify that you're actually dealing with the person you think you're dealing with. And the red flags there is if you never met the person, you've only been on the phone with them, you've only dealt with them online, and you're only going to see them when you deliver the vehicle. You need to be a bit more aware. I get it during the pandemic, that was sort of the way things were done, but that just sort of opened the door for fraudsters to commit these synthetic ID frauds, because they could say, well, no, I can't make it to the dealership. I just want to buy the car, blah, blah, blah. So, and it's a lot of, in these cases, a lot of these are money laundering. So it's being done by gangs. So they're very sophisticated on how they do this. But, if you don't deal with the person until you deliver the car, make sure you can verify their ID. There's plenty of ways to do that via some of these providers that we talked about. And with that, I think we're off to Q&A.
Yeah. So just to summarize, the key takeaway here is it's never been more dangerous for fraud in dealerships as it is now. The dollars we're dealing with is a lot more than it used to be.
Yeah.
So just that argument from dealers, and you also have to manage your expenses, right? So how do you prevent or detect fraud while keeping your expenses low? And the answer is data mining. That's honestly the point of today, right? It's data mining, using technology with a tool we didn't have before.
Yeah.
And then obviously the cybersecurity awareness, which I know it's been beaten to death. So, and then in that, I think, and then but that there's low cost ways if you just use a smarter way to prevent some of this stuff. So yeah, that's
and education. And we're here today listening about this. So obviously you're educating yourself, which is a good thing. All right. With that, Shawnee, any questions?
We don't, but people are able to turn on their microphones if they want to ask a question to our speakers. anything that wasn't covered or? No, it sounds like you guys did an amazing job and answered everyone's questions. Yes, we absolutely will be sending out a copy of the slide deck to everyone when we send this recording. So that was just one question that popped into the chat. It also has Stephen and Maya's contact details if you would like to get in touch with them about anything else regarding this topic. Once we've finalised this, we'll get it out to everyone by the end of the week. Great. Okay. I don't think there is any more questions. So thank you again for your time. That was extremely educational and interesting and scary at the same time.
Yeah, and depressing, I know. But it's about turning a challenge into an opportunity, right? That's what we do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the whole point around using technology that we have available today is really important and doing those checks. So thank you again. And thank you everyone for joining us for the conclusion of our Cyber Smart Dealers program. If you need anything else, please get in contact with us at the AADA as well. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.